Tell me a little bit about the center, the services that you guys provide here to the community.
Yeah, so the LGBTQ Center here, we provide, our biggest thing is that we are the ones that put on the annual Pride Fest, so the Chippewa Valley Pride every June. And that usually has it's in Phoenix Park, it's usually about 500 people, and we have vendors and acts and food and all that stuff, so we do that. We also provide support groups. We have a transgender support group, we have a weekly teen hangout for youth, and we also have some peer support groups like one-on-one, where we have people who want individual care rather than sitting in a group setting. So we provide those. We also do queer prom, which is a prom alternative for LGBTQ high school students. I guess I don't want to say youth, but high school students that may not feel particularly comfortable attending their own prom or want a different option, so we do that. Otherwise, we just do events. We support, we obviously keep the resource center open, so we have a place for people to visit. We have the Safe Spaces resource guide that we've partnered with the Safe Spaces Coalition on, that provides literally lists of different providers that are LGBTQ friendly, whether that's medical or just businesses. So that's really great. Otherwise, yeah, I guess we're just like a space for people to hang out.
Talk to me a little bit about the importance of having a center here in Eau Claire that provides all of those services for people in the community that do identify as LGBTQ.
So here in the Chippewa Valley, we are, it's kind of rare because we do have Eau Claire, but then we also have several rural areas surrounding us. So it's important for us to have a resource that everybody can go to in a centralized location. Right now, we are kind of, obviously, like Eau Claire is a more progressive city, but a lot of our outlying places aren't, and so we get a lot of outreach from those. It's important for us to have, especially, I think we're very youth focused. It's very important for us to provide a safe space for them, and to also provide resources for parents and guardians as they navigate kind of their children exploring their identity. So it's just super important to let people know that we're here and that we can provide them with as much information or help that they need.
How have you seen it grow in your 3 years here?
So actually it's grown exponentially. So before I came on, the center in itself has been around for the better half of 10 years. They didn't have an actual physical location for a long time. And then 3 years ago, not me, because I wasn't on there, but some of the current board members, they actually raised enough funds to open up a small office in Banbury, and Volume 1 did a article about it, and I was like, hey, I want to get involved. And that's how I came on as the events person at that point. And since then, we grew from literally a one-room office, probably the size of like that kitchen, to this. So this huge thing. So not only did we grow in our office size, we have moved around a lot as we explored options and as we outgrew different spaces, and then obviously all like the state theater issues that happened this winter. But yeah, we've just not only grew in size of our space, but there's been this core group of 2 or 3 individuals that really upheld this center for 10 years, and it's expanded to now that we have a full 7 board members. We have an exec committee. We have interns and volunteers that come over from the university every semester. So it's really grown, and we've become a more predominant staple in the community as a resource, where before we kind of just did Pride, and Pride's even grown. We used to do it, they used to just have it in a small park on the north side. Now it's a bigger thing. So yeah, we've seen a huge growth in the last 3 years.
Is that growth kind of reflected of the desire for these services in this area?
Yes, I think as Eau Claire has kind of shifted into a more open-minded, progressive city, I think that it's been more welcoming, and I think just like more welcoming of LGBTQ individuals in general. It's not a taboo subject to talk about, but it's also nice because parents are also more willing to explore options with their children, and to figure out resources. So I think just as a city, it's also expanded and also kind of turned that, like, it's just been more predominant, and I think we also really took marketing and advertising and making sure that we showed up to places, like kind of put ourselves out there more than we used to. And I think that's helped as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure social media has definitely helped you guys.
Yes.
Talking a little bit about same-sex marriage, it has been 5 years this year since it was legalized here in the United States. Can we talk a little bit about, how important that was? Obviously, we know it was historic, and we're here in America with same-sex marriage being legal, but what are some of the other things that we need to see coming out of Congress and the Supreme Court?
Yeah. So obviously, it was historic, same-sex marriage being legalized. It was one of those things where it really showed all this hard work and build up to achieve it. However, there's so much more work to do. So right now, we have seen that there's been no negative consequences of it. So like all the naysayers literally were wrong. But there's so much work to do. Right now, we are really focusing on transgender rights. I know we'll probably talk a little bit about the Employment Act and Title VII that came through. But pretty much transgender rights, right now, particularly in the state of Wisconsin, gender identity and expression is not a protected class. Only sexual orientation is. So it's important for us to pass gender expression and identity, especially through the Equality Act, into Congress. Equality Act did pass through the House of Representatives. It's on the Senate floor, but they are not willing to take it up at this time. But it's so important because transgender people are not protected. In many states, I think it's only maybe even less than 10 states where they are. So that means that they can be discriminated against in housing, adoption, no longer workplace, education, and medical and all that. So
when we're talking about when you say they can be discriminated against, does this mean that they can be denied services and other things?
Denied services, fired, stuff like that. I know that the state of Wisconsin, they did pass law in that you cannot discriminate against transgender people in Medicaid, so like surgeries and stuff like that. But yeah, so they can be denied services, they can be denied adoptions, they can be denied housing, they can be denied work, just for being transgender.
And they can't take any legal action against that?
They can. I mean, like, that's usually what prompts, like, these laws to, like, change. But there is no, like, legal standing with gender expression identity in Wisconsin right now. And on a federal level, there's not either.
When it comes to trans rights, but let's talk about specifically, what does it mean to be transgender?
It's hard to explain in a way that makes sense because I feel like so many different trans and non-binary people are different in how they express their gender identity and expression. So essentially it's when a person was born one sex but identifies as an other, or that they relate or they are. So like a trans woman was born with male genitalia, they were assigned male at birth, but they're actually a woman.
Could we discuss a little bit about the difference between gender and sex?
So yes, so sex is your biological XY, XX chromosomes, and usually your sex is what you're assigned at birth, so male, female, depending on your genitalia, and gender is a societal construct as to how you should behave depending on your genitalia or how you were assigned at birth. So gender is definitely created by society, so I think that it's important to understand that when you speak to like transgender individuals, it's just that they are breaking societal norms, and I think that's why it's a little scary for most people, but like there's no actual scientific proof or necessity to have to be masculine just because you were born a male or feminine because you're born. So I think, and non-binary folks are really balance that line, and I think it's something like as society that we need to work on and understand that gender is not a straight, hard, forward thing. So
when speaking about work that society needs to do, when it comes to trans people in the media, how are they portrayed?
I think especially back in the early 2000s and 90s, like they were often portrayed as a joke. You've seen them in movies where it was men dressed as women to try to get away with something, to infiltrate. You've seen that. I can name probably dozens of movies where you've seen that kind of behavior where like men were just acting as women to get into these women's groups and stuff like that. But yeah, it was usually a joke. It was never taken seriously. Very few films took transgender individuals seriously, but more so transgender people in the media is oftentimes misrepresented and misunderstood as they're portraying a woman, I guess you should say, without like feeling it, that they can turn it on and off. And it's just like, it's not real. It's just, and that's, we can talk about TERFs too, where like those are people who believe that trans women aren't real women, that they're just they're just dressed as women. They don't have the same struggles as biological women, but they do. And we here at the center firmly believe that trans women are real women and trans men are real men. And there's no arguing that with us.
When it comes to the notion of, one person expecting something from someone else just based on the way they were born, what do you think that kind of stems from? Why are some people so hard pressed to say that this person is this gender because that's what they were assigned at birth?
I think it's because as a society we have pushed this binary concept of male and female for centuries. It's always been that way. Men have always tried to have an upper hand. Toxic masculinity plays into it as well. It's what we've created as a society, and any change is, people don't welcome change, people don't understand change, and oftentimes when people don't understand something, it makes them angry, confused, and unwilling to learn because they don't get why they should. I think that we are slowly changing that, but it's difficult, I think, for a lot of people to understand why it's important and what kind of effects it has, especially on younger generations and the youth as they grow up and they're trying to understand who they are and who they're going to become, and unwillingness to see anything in a different light is harmful to them.
It brings me to the issue of when we've seen non-trans actors portraying trans characters in movies and things like that. There has been, social justice movements about the fact that there should be people that actually are trans, that are actors and actresses portraying trans characters. Talk to me a little bit about how having people that aren't trans do that hurts the community.
Representation of transgender individuals in movies and having cisgender people play them is harmful because it makes it seem as though it's just a man dressed up as a woman, or it's something that it's just an outward foreign thing. Like it's just a man portraying a woman or identifying as an outward woman rather than how it embodies transgender individuals. It's so much more than that. Their brains, their soul, they are women. And so when you choose a cisgender person to play that, it kind of totally disingenuines everything. And all the work that people do to show that they are real women, this is a real gender identity and expression, this is a real thing. It just shows that, anybody can do it. It's kind of very on the plain level. And there's also so many transgender individuals who are actors and actresses that to not want to hire them is discrimination in itself, because you'd rather pay an actor that's well known to play it. So it's almost like a sensationalization, and you shouldn't sensationalize transgender people for the sake of your own money and profit. So
when it comes to that, what you're saying is they kind of focus solely on the fact that they're, they dress a certain way or they might be a certain way, as opposed to who they actually are.
So when cisgender people play transgender characters, it's almost given the perception that anybody can be transgender. You just have to dress like a woman or dress like a man that day. But that's not what transgender people are not just dressing up that day. They're not just pretending to be a woman that day and then going home. They are women. and they should be respected, and you should, and like I said, there's so many talented people out there that could play those that it's a disservice to the LGBTQ community to not have that representation.
When we're talking about violence that we see against people that are trans in the country, what is that like to see that outwardly and know that that's happening? Yeah,
so trans violence and murder has increased exponentially in the last couple of years. We can talk about why that's happening, the theories around it, but we're living in a time where more people are comfortable with violence and outwardly showing their distaste for people. And I think it stems from so many things, but it comes from not understanding. It comes from society's understanding of binary gender, and we see this across all LGBT. Gay people have been murdered at high rates as well throughout life. But I think when it comes to trans, like these days, it's because people are more comfortable they feel like they are in a place where it's okay to hate people. And to show that hate for people, like there's not been any repercussions from our leaders for this kind of action. So that's all happening. We see it a lot so Black trans women are the #1 murdered, and they're the #1 target for violence. There's a lot of reasonings behind that. A lot of it comes back to toxic masculinity. It comes back to people not feeling as though these people are part of society, that they just don't, because they don't fall into a construct that was created, that they don't deserve to be here.
Well, speaking of that, how can people who don't identify within the community be actual allies? How can they help not only trans people, but everyone in the community? Because you said it's all throughout. You see it, discrimination all across the board.
To be an ally, it is to stand up for us, to show up for us, and to be there for us in the good and the bad. You have to also understand the different aspects of being a part of the LGBTQ community, what that means, and you also have to understand intersectionality amongst them. LGBTQ people are in all walks of life. They're in all races, they're in all religions, they're in all communities, they're in all parts of the country, they're in all jobs. LGBTQ people do not discriminate depending on other communities. So when you do the work for LGBTQ communities, and you have to do the work for other communities. So LGBTQ is not just one aspect of allyship. You have to be an ally for people of color, for low income, for the homeless, for the persecuted. Like, you have to it's not, and I think that's an issue that we see amongst a lot of allies, is that we see a lot of people focusing on protecting like the white gay male, and you see a lot of white gay male-focused LGBTQ organizations that aren't using intersectionality, and they aren't focused on equity and inclusion within their own organizations and also the work they do. So to be an ally, it just means that you have to take in consideration that this is a very broad community, and this part of being LGBTQ just makes you more marginalized within your community. Like I said, Black trans women, they have, not only do they suffer from being in marginalized groups across the board and oftentimes having to live in poverty, but they are also denied then medical care. They are less likely to receive medical care. They are more likely to be victims of police brutality. They are also oftentimes the ones that are not respected once they are arrested. So you'll see them being thrown into male prisons even though they're women, or you see them sexually assaulted, stuff like that. So I think intersectionality is super important to be an ally.
Yeah, I like that you brought that up, because I know I've seen, like, when Queer Eye came back, the reboot, the people had a lot of problems with it because it was 5 cisgendered males who, and they were under the broad umbrella of the word queer, and they didn't really actually represent queer people or people that do identify within the community. So just for a breakdown, if people don't know what intersectionality means, I know you eloquently spoke about it, but just a little bit about specifically how that is and what that means.
So intersectionality is understanding that so like a marginalized community intersects with another marginalized community, I guess is the best way to put it, or like understanding that all voices are valid within a community. So you have to understand, and I think it's best, and I kind of explained this before, but it's easiest to understand when I do talk about the LGBTQ community, because we are broad. And there's so many people that fall under our umbrella, but there's also, you see LGBTQ people and people of color communities, and low-income communities, and women, men, all religions, all jobs. You see them in all countries. It doesn't discriminate. It's not like an American, like, white thing. Like, all countries see it. You see them in all aspects of life, so you have to take that into consideration. So the struggles of a white gay man is not going to be the same as a black gay man. You have to take in the issues that are facing the other parts of the community into consideration when you try to understand solutions to problems. It's not always simple, and it's like you have to work across a broad spectrum of understanding and not be so siloed into one aspect.
When you mentioned solutions, so when it comes to solutions at the local level, state, federal, talk to me about the importance of having representation there.
LGBTQ and marginalized representation is minimal across all local, state, national. We're still a white-dominated country and white male-dominated, and we have an issue with bringing other voices to the table. I don't think that marginalized communities are voiceless. I think they're just suppressed, and they're not being brought. So I think that it's important for people to understand that the people who have the solutions are the people that are facing the problems. I would never expect somebody else to solve my issues if they don't know my issues. So I think that we need to start bringing people to the table, but we also need to get off the table, if that makes sense. Like, we can't just like pull up extra chairs. Like, we actually have to like give our chairs. And so I think that's something that we're still going to be experiencing systemic oppression until there's a complete overhaul of that idea. And that's a whole nother hometown conversation that we can have. But yeah, so I think that solution, so I think and I know that Eau Claire is really great at trying to work on this. I think that Chippewa Valley is really great at bringing people in to resolve the issues. I know that especially at city council level, whether it's affordable housing or any kind of like when it came to like the budget and like the police concerns, like they're really good at bringing in those directly affected. But that's not a norm. We do live in a bubble here, and so we kind of have to remember that. But we are still very white, cis, straight led, and it's hard to, I get it, it's hard to give up like your spot, but people need to give up their spots.
You said we're here in a bubble here in Eau Claire, but how about Wisconsin specifically?
Wisconsin is, so we're known for being a progressive state. We were like, progress forward is our mantra. So it's like we've always been the leader in progressive movements, but you haven't seen that in the last 10 years. I would say that if anything, we've scaled back. We were at the center of like the transgender bathroom bill issues. One of the people named in the whole thing was from Wisconsin. But yeah, we haven't really seen any progress for LGBTQ individuals in Wisconsin in the last 10 years at all. I don't think we've actually seen progress for anybody in Wisconsin at all in the last 10 years. We are at a standstill in healthcare. We're at a standstill in everything. So yeah, Wisconsin needs to work on it. I think we had a lot of hope with this last in 2018, but nothing's really changed.
What do you think that comes down to?
it's because those that we have elected don't need to be held accountable because they have drawn their own districts. So gerrymandering is a huge issue in Wisconsin, and I think that we are not holding our legislators accountable enough because they don't have to be accountable. They don't work for us. But we also just don't have, we live in all these little bubbles, and it's very hard. We're very good at othering, so we do like rural versus urban and stuff like that. And I think that until we understand that everybody, like, we all want the same things, like we all want healthy, thriving communities, we all want access to health care and education and stuff like that. So we just need to all come together and understand and create a way for that to happen. And until that happens, and until everybody starts working for everybody, it's not going to change.
Switching gears a little bit, there was a study that came out recently about bisexuality, and it was saying that more women are identifying as bisexual as opposed to men. Could we talk a little bit about why you think that is?
Yes. So women come out as bisexual more often than men because oftentimes we have trained men to not explore their sexuality outside of heteronormative reason. Like, we all know that it's okay for like men to explore, like we don't encourage and toxic. That's the theme of this thing. So masculinity and understanding that men should not be with other men has been an issue. They're seen as less masculine, less as a man. They have been torn down, and so men are not encouraged to understand that. And even if men do realize that they have sexual attractions to their same sex, it's usually suppressed, or they don't outwardly express it in fear of retaliation. It's just normal cisgender heteronormative actions, whereas women are more encouraged to explore who they are. Women are less likely to face backlash for love. Like, we see it all the time where people are more comfortable with women being out because they see homosexuality as being a more feminine thing. We can talk about how media has portrayed gay men like they always are more feminized. There's a strong belief that if for some reason you love same sex as a male, that you are all of a sudden more of a woman. Like, you can't both be masculine men in a relationship. Somebody has to be the feminine kind of thing. Where women, it's already there, and it's also a comfortable place. So, like I mentioned in the interview a couple of days ago, the media is more comfortable portraying a lesbian couple than they are a gay couple. Like, it's more like people are not as offended to see two women kissing on TV than they are two men. And it's all because of toxic masculinity, because if a man likes a man, then they automatically become less of a man in the minds of people who have a lot of bigotry. So,
does that kind of come back to the idea of belittling women too? Because
yes,
can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that women have always, so it's all patriarchal, belittling of women. Women are used as these sexual objects. Women are used to be thought of as less than, and they're not as intimidating. They don't need to be macho men. They don't need to be superior, because society has always thought of women as second-class citizens. So I think it's one of those things, and yeah, it does.
Yeah, because when I think about it, and you think about the idea of if a man is more feminine, then obviously there's something wrong with him, or if he's less than, because of that kind of might go back to the view of that someone might have of women in general. Or when you think about drag queens and things like that, when men dress up as women in as a portrayal, as a way to kind of, drag queens might see it as admiring women and respecting them, but other heterosexual men might see it as another way kind of thing, because it's almost like a joke to be a woman. It might be in their minds.
Yeah. I think that, you kind of hit it on the head right with that whole statement. So yeah, I'll agree.
So in Illinois, they had just passed a law that will make education on LGBTQ history mandatory in public schools. That did get a lot of backlash there from people, because they feel that it's kind of putting it in the minds of students as opposed to letting students or younger children explore those ideas or those notions on their own. What are your thoughts on that?
So teaching LGBTQ history and also LGBTQ health is so important for these students, because there's LGBTQ students in the school, and so their representation matters as much as anybody else's representation. They need to know the struggles and the history behind predominant, so like they need to know about the Stonewall riots and why that was important for the gay rights movement. They need to understand the fight for equality up until gay marriage was allowed. They need to understand the Equality Act. They need to understand the suppression and the struggles that LGBTQ people have faced, so that we don't, one, make those mistakes again, but also so that they feel like they are valid, and like they are not, if you don't see yourself in the history books, then you're not going to see yourself as actually mattering or existing. And LGBTQ health in schools is so important, because these LGBTQ students oftentimes struggle with understanding their own sexuality and their own sexual health. And so giving them a safe place to learn about that and learn about the options will prevent any kind of harm or in the future, but also allow them to be able to be comfortable with their bodies and how to take care of their bodies, and know that not everybody is the same. We don't live in a male-female world, and it's okay to have different kind of expressions, and you don't have to fall into those categories.
What are your thoughts on, I mean, it's an argument that we hear all the time, especially when it comes to movies or things like that they, when you see the portrayal of people that are in the community on TV, that it's kind of encouraging it, or just exposing people to it, or people who don't want to see it or don't want their children to see it. What are your thoughts on that?
Those are just closed-minded people that are not willing to understand that LGBTQ people are not a fetish, they're not a secret. They're out in the world, your neighbors, your friends, your family, they're LGBTQ, and saying that your children don't want to see it is sexualizing things that don't need to be sexualized. This is just people living their lives and being who they want to be. There's nothing wrong about it. There's nothing abnormal about it, and saying that you don't want your children to see it or they're too young to understand is not true, because there's nothing to understand. Basically, they're just normal people living their normal lives. They're just not falling into your societal mindset.
So we talked a little bit earlier about the unemployment discrimination, SCOTUS, they can't be discriminated against. What was that like to have that come from the top?
That was major for especially the transgender community when they voted against. So now and I believe it's Title VII. It's morning. So in Title VII, so transgender people and gender identity and expression can no longer be discriminated in the workplace. Like I said earlier, the state of Wisconsin did not have workplace protections for gender identity and expression. It's really important, because when I talk about that, and I used to work for the Human Rights Campaign, so I used to talk to people about this issue, particularly in Wisconsin, and many people would be like, well, gender is a protected class, but people need to understand that society's idea of gender is not gender identity and expression. People do not have to identify as male or female, which is what's protected. Non-binary people weren't protected. Transgender people were not protected in that. And so this was historical. I personally think this is more historical than the legalization of gay marriage, because right now so many trans people are being attacked, that making this like the Supreme Court making this bold statement is kind of showing where we can go for equal rights for all LGBTQ people.
Those were all of the questions that I had. Is there anything else that you'd want to talk about or that we didn't touch on that you think is important?
Oh, God. No.
There's so many things. I know it'd be hard to choose one, but we did cover a lot.
Yes.
All right. I think we're good. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Awesome. It was so lovely to speak to you. Oh my goodness.
Thank you. I've been holding this yawning.